Hey, good afternoon, folks. Donnie Hall here with YouEQ Sports, bringing you today's guest, Ryan Sweeney from Premier Sports Academy. He is the founder and president of this phenomenal baseball academy out in Newfoundland, where they are changing the culture by taking a neck-up approach to developing young athletes and future superstars and just overall phenomenal new human beings. So no further ado, Ryan, man, I appreciate you joining us today. I know it's the second time we've done this, but we're going to do it again. Man, I'm just so thankful to have you on. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Premier Sports Academy.
Perfect. Obviously, thanks again, Donnie. For those who are tuning in, Donnie and I had a couple of lives together. First life is we worked together in the oil patch many, many years ago. Then our second life, Donnie actually became a bit of a mentor to myself when I was starting this business. So, kind of new evolution now that the business has started. We've developed a new relationship through YouEQ and some of these other things that we're working on. So just wanted to say thanks and give a little shout out there first. So again, like Donnie said, my name is Ryan Sweeney. I'm the founder and the president of Premier Sports Academy. A little bit about Premier Sports Academy. We are the first indoor baseball and softball facility in Newfoundland. We have a multi-sport feel to us, but we're the only facility that is specifically designed to accommodate baseball and softball. A little bit about Premier Sports Academy, why it's important. When I was 15 years old, I left Newfoundland to pursue baseball further. Couldn't really train or compete at the level that I needed to here when I was a kid. So my parents moved my brother and I to Ontario to continue playing baseball, and we got to play with some pretty incredible programs up there and had our eyes open to, how it's kind of being done elsewhere. And this is, pushing on 20 years ago now. And then, fast forward many years later, I ended up back in Newfoundland, started a family, and then the time felt right once I had the family of my own to kind of take this chance and provide this so that I could spend more time at home and less time traveling, which is how I met Donnie. So that's a little bit about Premier Sports.
Ryan, in the time that you and I've known each other, we've obviously gotten to know each other, and the importance of you being at home has been a big thing. And then obviously I've grown to learn how much developing young athletes really means to you. And so, you guys are doing something extremely different out there from most sports programs that I'm familiar with. I know you and Austin have chatted quite a bit, and you guys are developing similar programs. What are you guys doing differently than most other programs that are out there that are available to young athletes?
Yeah, and I guess, not to say that it's different. I think there's lots of people that are doing a lot of good stuff. It's really broken through now, mental performance. It's always existed on the fringes of sport. You would hear about it or see about it at the highest levels, though nobody talked about it. But now it's really had a breakthrough. And I think a big part of that is because of the pandemic. So if I rewind, nearly a year ago, when we had the first shutdown in March of 2020, Noah and I started our guest speaker podcast with PSA. We got in touch with a lot of incredible people in the sports world that are focused on this side of the game. And that played a big role in us. And it made Noah and I take a second look at what we were doing and what our goals were. And I mean, I just think anecdotally at that time, things that I was doing myself to kind of get through that pandemic when we were shut down for so many months. And so I just, Noah and I, we realized that this is something we need to make sure that translates and stays in our program, once we get started back up. I mean, something simple that I was doing in the very beginning, I was stretching and meditating nightly during the pandemic, and just for my own, mental sanity, we'll say. So we kind of built on those foundations. So you mentioned Austin Byler is somebody, he runs Major League University. Shout out to Austin. A few other people that we talked to was Hannah Huseman with the Phillies. She's a mental performance coach. Alan Jaeger and China McCarney with Jaeger Sports. Those two gentlemen are, we'll say, on the cutting edge. They've been really big into mental preparation in sports, and specifically baseball, for, probably 20 years now. So these are things we're incorporating at all levels of our program. So we do 11U, 13U, 15U, and 17U. And something we do is, we incorporate mental training into both baseball practice and into our strength and conditioning. And, the approach we take is to get that mental clarity before we dial into our skill work or our strength and conditioning work, so that we can focus and maximize and kind of get the most out of, what we're trying to teach these kids.
And so you guys obviously have recognized the value of this. You're seeing your player performance, I want to say both on and off the field, it's elevated because of the work that you're doing. I know you guys have also, and I got to give a plug to the emotional work that you guys are doing, the emotional intelligence stuff. What are the overall impacts that you're noticing in your players, not only just your players, but yourselves as coaches? Like, what's the impact that you guys are recognizing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think off the top of my head, and I actually had this conversation with someone not that long ago, I think his maturity is probably one of the biggest differences I've noticed immediately. And I can give some anecdotal experiences. I mean, some of the kids in the program, there's one kid that comes to mind in particular without naming names, but when the program first started, he struggled with the mental performance aspects that we were trying to deliver. And a big reason that he struggled is not because he's not a good kid or any of these things. It's because he has difficulty sitting still for that long. And let's be honest, that's very common with a lot of kids that age. And so it was a work in progress for him. So, the act of laying down for 10 minutes and meditating, or doing a social emotional game with peers in the group to discuss emotions and feelings and try to articulate and understand what they mean, was a struggle for him. But I've noticed definitely since the new year, he's one of the most vocal people in the group now in terms of providing feedback when we're doing our group discussions, or asking what he learned in a particular meditation session. And it seemed like the switch flipped overnight. But then I look back and think, well, we've been doing this 2 days a week for 4.5 months. So, it's no wonder that it's working. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing off the top, is that maturity. And that's kind of bleeding over into everything else. It's their maturity in how they approach practice. It's their maturity in how they approach training, and taking away key concepts like never taking a rep out. And so I think you're just seeing that maturity leak into other parts of what they do.
It honestly, it warms my heart, because I know it's something that's often not talked about. I don't want to say it's necessarily frowned upon, but it's something that was never really incorporated into sports. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of people that are out there doing a lot of good things. But as you guys have entered into this realm, you've taken a really serious approach to it. And, through the stories from Susan, doing the work that she's doing, even some of the other coaches, we're really starting to hear a fairly monumental shift in the way that our young athletes are, one, responding to their coaches, responding to each other. How is this impacting them off the field? Like, aside from maturity, but from when they take it home.
Well, and that's also a great question as well. And, we're in the process, as as we need to get that survey out to the players and the families. And again, we do hear anecdotally from the families that this stuff does carry over. They're better students. They're, a little bit more well-behaved at home. And that's ultimately the goal of all this. It's not to make them a better baseball player. Baseball is just a tool, right? It's the tool to teach them skills. They will become good at baseball because of this. But like we tell them, you'll be better at basketball. You'll be better at hockey. You'll be better at tiddlywinks. It doesn't matter what you're doing. That's kind of the approach that we take. And that's what we're hearing, is that it is, I hate to use the term bleeding over again, but it really is kind of bleeding over. And again, we've had some anecdotal responses from parents, but I'm certainly looking forward to collecting that feedback through the survey.
Absolutely. And Ryan, I'm extremely curious. I apologize. My dogs are barking in the background, of course. I'm really curious because, as I've mentioned, I've experienced like the coaching, sports coaching many years ago. And, this was never part of it. This was never part of me developing as a human, as an athlete. And so I'm really curious, in your experience, you've played at pretty high level. You've coached at a high level. How is this different? How is what you guys are doing different than what you've experienced? And then ultimately, what's the intent of doing it differently?
That's a really good question. One of the things that first pops to mind is when I think about the conversations you're able to have with kids. I think it's It's really important when you're coaching or basically doing anything. You need to have the ability to constructively correct behavior, and this kind of leads into other thing. How can you constructively correct or change behavior with somebody that you can't have a good conversation with? And I'd say that especially with younger kids, you're talking to, like, some of the kids in our program, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. How can you have meaningful conversation with them and you want them to follow very explicit instruction, but you haven't created an atmosphere where you can have open and honest dialogue? And one of the things that led into me is understanding a little bit more about what motivates people. And we had a group chat with my 13U group, and I'll probably never forget this for the rest of my life. It was a very intuitive question, and I'd let you know about this, a couple months back, Donnie. When we're doing group session, we're basically asking questions around the circle left and right. You're asking the person next to you. You have to say their name, ask them the question, they get a response, and they do the same thing to the person next to them. And I happen to be sitting next to this, this young kid. He's 12 years old, and his question to me, which blew my mind, he asked me, he said, "What motivates you to, what motivated you to open PSA?" And I remember thinking, like, that is such an incredibly deep question for a 12-year-old, and it spun off into like a 20-minute conversation about my good friend Scott that died when we were in high school, and he was a huge motivator for me to start this and do some other things in my life, and then we were able to take that conversation where these kids understood what motivates me and what I'm using to kind of move forward, and then we started progressing into setting goals with these kids, so that they understand what motivates them, and then they can start putting the steps in place to kind of achieve some of their own dreams and their own goals. And that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's kind of where some of this stuff is going. And that's the conversations that we weren't having when we were 12 and 13 years old, for sure. All I did was play Tony Hawk. That's basically it. You know what I mean? There was no conversations about anything that was meaningful.
No, and just the fact that, and I remember, like, specifically reciting this to someone the other day, is just that the space was never presented for me to even share what was going on, right? Like, whether it be a struggle or something good that was happening, it just, the questions that were launched at me never really opened up the space for me to give an authentic answer. And I think that's what I'm hearing is that you guys are tapping into, is allowing these kids to be their authentic selves, which allows them to be better athlete because they can communicate better. They can, they can empathize with their other players. And then when they go home, they can communicate with their parents. So very, very cool. Ryan, you guys got a wonderful announcement today out in Newfoundland that, kind of puts you guys in a bit of a pickle. I know the rest of the country has also struggled with lockdowns and kids not being able to play sports. And as I mentioned you prior to jumping on here, like, when sports used to shut down for us, like, that was it. They shut down, and, we'd be left to our Tony Hawk or the odd possibly reading a book. You guys are doing something a little extra to make sure that your players and athletes are staying engaged. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't formally announced it because it just happened. We haven't told our parents, kind of what's coming yet. But there's a multi-phase approach. So the video that we showed at the beginning, that's something we've been working on for a while, knowing that we would need that. So we've developed a drill series for all of our athletes that we'll share on our own private YouTube channel. So I think we've got a database of like 30 training videos now, a good chunk of which can actually be performed at home, and that's something we always think about, especially in this new reality that we have. On top of that, we'll be doing our mental prep and our S&C and some of our baseball stuff from home as well, so that we'll try to keep that transition seamless. And the information that we're getting right now is team sports are shut down, but it doesn't appear that training is. So probably what we're going to end up doing, and we're going to get confirmation on that right now, is we will space out our programming, cancel practice, allow just a few kids at a time to come into the facility in certain time blocks. It's completely separated in the building, work individually on their own things, and then they leave. And then, a little while later, the next group comes in. So we're going to be putting some stuff together just to try to keep that transition. They've made a ton of progress in the last 4 to 5 months when we started running this program. So we're just going to make sure that that ball keeps rolling. We won't let that pause. So we'll just, we pick up and we move on. Doesn't matter what the situation is. That's what we're teaching them too, is that kind of durability and resiliency as we all move forward.
Again, man, absolutely incredible that you guys are putting this much effort into making sure that your players are staying engaged. I'm gonna jump here because I want to tap into the emotional intelligence stuff and the work that you guys are doing, because that's obviously extremely important to me, and we've touched on it a little bit. How has that worked specifically? Like, we've talked about how it's opened up conversations, but how has it specifically affected the way that your coaches have approached, coaching their youth?
That's a really good point. And, I can speak a little bit for myself and Noah. Everybody else would need to have their own opinion, because this is stuff that Noah and I talk about as well. One of the things that comes to mind for me is overcoaching. And that's the way I think about it. It's definitely how it's trained me. I think anyone that's coached, we have a tendency to overcoach a situation or an athlete rather than letting them figure it out. We just kind of immediately try to correct them all the time. Just, do it this way, not that way. Do it this way, not that way. And I think that's what the game allowed me to see is, using a very simple example is when someone talks about an emotion. So they pull a card from the deck. I'm going to give a very rudimentary example here, but they pull a card, and let's say they pull the card that says joy. And then they go through, they explain what they feel joy means, and then they give an example of joy. The immediate example is not correct. Now I think about it, it's like, ask somebody else, what does joy mean to you? What's another situation, or what's a situation where, you can say that you've experienced joy, and we allow it to kind of happen organically rather than like shoving the correction down the athlete's, throat, we'll say. They get the opportunity to actually figure it out on their own through their peers and kind of their surroundings. So that's one of the things that I've certainly noticed is it helps you, take your foot off the gas a little bit when it comes to things like overcoaching athletes.
I'd honestly never thought about it in that way. So thank you for elaborating that. I'm just going to pull this up because I think it's kind of cool that Susan pulled this up and said, Noah and I had a great mental prep session last night with an 11U circle chat completely linked to emotions and sharing the last time they felt scared, happy, safe, agitated. I'm sure there's more, and saying that we have come a long way since October. Obviously that hits me in the heart, but what does that mean to you when, like, let's just be frank, emotions in sport, we see them as spectators, we feel them as athletes, but we sure as hell don't talk about them. And here you guys are doing this with kids as like 11U, probably even below that. For you guys to be pulling this out of your athletes, to having these kind of conversations that was taboo at one point, you guys are entering into a space that is almost untapped. And how does that make you feel when you guys are touching those emotion strings with your kids?
Well, I mean, especially with the group that Susan helps out with, the 11U, that's a pretty young group, and that's when you hear the term like herding cats sometimes, I mean, it can definitely be a little bit like that. So it's definitely a challenge, and so seeing the benefits that they get from that is kind of huge. And we have this, what does it mean and how does it translate? We use the term all the time, like changing the culture. It's sometimes it has a positive connotation, sometimes it's negative. It just depends on which light you're looking at it from. But I say something all the time to my 13U group. So this is a bit of fun, a bit of tongue in cheek. Yeah. Can you swear on this podcast, Donnie?
Sure, let her buck.
So what I say to the kids is I say, okay, it's bad word time. Is what I say to my 13U group. I say, who wants to hear a bad word? And they kind of all raise their hand. And I say, when it comes to with teammates, I said, I will say something like, if the shortstop makes an error and he's your good friend, are you going to shit on him? And they're all like, no, he's my friend. And they say, okay, how about if the shortstop is somebody you don't really know, or perhaps it's somebody you don't like and they make an error? I said, are you going to shit on them? And they're all like, yeah, probably, right? And so it's just, that's how we use the game, is we mix them up a lot, and we've created this dynamic where while they may not be friends with everybody, they're close to everybody in a way that they know a lot about them. And so that's the types of changes that I see. Is just, I can picture back to when I played basketball. I think basketball, a sport like basketball, is one of the best examples. And I can name like 3 people that I would pass the ball to. Why? Because I had a good relationship with them first, and they were good players second, right? And it's just like that happens in sports a lot. It has that. It's not right or wrong. I'm not here to talk about that one way or the other. It's just kind of, it is what it is. But these opportunities to play these types of games starts to remove that element. And I think what we're going to start seeing is kids will make decisions based off of what seems right in the moment, rather than Billy's my buddy, so Billy's getting the ball. It's going to be like, what do I think the right decision or the right play is? So it's getting them in that mind frame to remove some of these external factors. Because they're comfortable with everybody, they're going to make decisions that are just relative to the collective team goals of trying to be successful.
That's wow. Yeah. I honestly, I saw that all the time playing hockey. We see it playing rugby. It's who do you connect with? Because that's who you play with at the end of the day. Like that's genuine. Who you play with is who you connect with. And so now you guys have opened up a door to where, a team of 12 to 16 ball players are all connecting on the same level. They're developing relationships, and now they can all play as a team and take out that who likes who response to play with each other and work towards that common goal. So it's actually really cool that you guys are doing that. Ryan, we're gonna tap out here shortly. I'm really curious, how has the work that you've done, let's say in the last year, you've been impacted. I know specifically you've been impacted, like many, by the pandemic. You've incorporated, and I know you always have had this idea of incorporating the mental prep, but how has the vision of PSA, how has it grown into something so much more now that you're seeing how much the work is actually impacting the youth that you guys bring into that facility?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and I've talked about this a few times as well. I've always had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And from that aspect, it hasn't changed very much. And I think that has to do with the fact that I actually spent a lot of time thinking about this business before I ever got it off the ground. You know how long I've been talking to you about this. I mean, this goes back a long, long time. There's been, many times where I've been walking in the woods hours on end with my dog, just thinking about this business. Like, it was so real, I could taste it long before it ever was real. And so I had a really good vision. But what the pandemic has allowed me to do, I think in my mind, is go directly towards the things that I know, that like I just have a gut feeling like I need to do them. So, instead of like talking about these 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 year plans, it's like those are great financially, we'll say, for some things. It's like, setting financial goals. But in terms of like, creating these things that the athletes need, it's like line it up, knock it down, line it up, knock it down. If that happens in 3 months or 3 years, it doesn't matter. It's just don't do it on a timeline because you had it, placed on some sort of pedestal timeline. So it's like we're running head first towards these things that we know we need. It's YouEQ, it's meditation, it's mental performance, it's arm care, it's going out and getting one of the best, strength and conditioning coaches around. A bit of a shout out to Dan Hearn. It's doing all of those things that will separate us. From a team level, if you want to call it a team level, call it our development team. The pieces that we've kind of put together, there's very few programs around that are offering that, and that's not a knock on anybody else. It's just we've had this vision and we're just running towards it. And, we're also willing to share this with other people too. We have people reach out all the time, and, we're not trying to keep this some sort of big secret. Is we want everybody to kind of benefit from these things that we're doing, because we're seeing benefits with it from our kids.
It's an absolute infinite mindset statement that you just said, that like you're willing to share this with everyone because you want everyone to benefit from it. And that's ultimately what I'm hearing from you, Ryan. It's, you guys aren't necessarily playing the short game. It's you're giving them the skills to go out and win a baseball game, but ultimately you are developing generations upon generations upon generations of kids and athletes to go on and lead better lives. And so the work that you're doing requires, a lot of dedication, also a lot of emotional intelligence to be able to tap into those athletes and the parents who trust you to put their lives in your hands. And so one, I commend you, and I'm extremely grateful for all the work that you guys are doing. We're going to get out of here, man. I'm going to let you go finish off your day. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of finish off with and share with people that might be listening? I know we've had quite a few people jump in and out. Any final words that you'd like to share with the athletes that might see this?
Yeah, no, obviously if any parents and coaches, players are watching, obviously thanks, to those that have supported us. Those that want to learn more, certainly don't hesitate to reach out. I'm definitely looking forward to getting our hands on the EQ to IQ Sports deck that I know is coming my way. And one of the things I'll say, if you want to learn how to incorporate some mental preparation stuff into your program, I think one of the first places that you can start is with breathing techniques and visualization techniques. And then once you can get your kids over the silliness of that, because it is silly at the beginning for sure, it's going to take a few days to get them through it. Once you've kind of prepped them for that, you can easily jump into things like the cards, and the cards will seem comical at first. And I'm going to be absolutely honest about that. It is absolutely comical, but it's mostly because there's 30 people in the room laughing because they're trying to talk about emotions, and 13-year-olds don't do that very well. But I promise once you kind of get into it, it becomes something that they look forward to be quite honest. So if you want to learn more from us or just chat, feel free to reach out at any time. And thanks again, Donnie, obviously.
Ryan, man, my hat goes off to you. In fact, it's sitting on the shelf right there. So, man, I'm forever grateful. We're going to get out of here. I think you saw the comment from David, and Vanessa's chimed in as well. So we've had a number of people watching. We're grateful for all of you guys. Go and check out PSA on Facebook. The address is right there. Come check us out at YouEQ. It's UYOU-EQ.com. You can learn all about the emotional intelligence stuff and how it can benefit your kids and the games that we can provide. We also jump into coaching and consulting as well. So for any of you guys who are interested, reach out to Ryan. They've got a phenomenal program out there. They are leading the way and just taking things to the next level. So Ryan, man, we're going to skip out of here. Appreciate your time,
Cheers.
man.
Thanks, Donnie. Take care.